Hey guys, my name's Nero. Welcome to my first YouTube video on this channel. So I wanted to create this channel to really document my journey of reading and to document how I'm slowly or how I'm developing my love for reading and for literature specifically, and just to explain how I kind of fell in love with reading within the last week. That's what this video will be about. So I've been reading since about November. This was the first time I picked up a fiction book in a couple of years, and it was Red Rising, and I love the book. I wouldn't say now I'm a sci-fi fantasy reader, or I wouldn't say that's one of my top genres, but I did enjoy that book. But I think when I was reading back then, and since November to about even like last month, I was really reading for plot, right? I wanted to read a book that would have me hooked for the plot, and that went from plot point to plot point, something that was fast. And I wouldn't really appreciate the writing as much as I would have liked to. Right, I read The Picture of Dorian Gray. That was the second book I actually read after Red Rising. And, I think now, and I think then, when I first read it, that was some of the best writing I've ever read, right? And I don't think I took enough time to really appreciate it, right? And this goes into my story of how I fell in love with reading. And it starts or kind of develops last week. So it was a super late night, maybe at around like 12 or 1 a.m. And I was just thinking to myself, like, well, why didn't I just try writing, right? I used to like writing in elementary school. I had this one short story that I'd written like when I was in like grade maybe 4. And this was just, it was a short story, like my friends were in it, and it was such a great opportunity to really make something and feel proud of myself for making something. And then my friends had read it, and it was just like such a fun experience. But I never really carried that after elementary school. I would have these random kind of spurts where I'd want to write, and I do have like a Google Drive folder where I keep all these documents that are only filled with one page, because I have an idea, I write it, and then I just stop, right? I didn't carry that same passion for, creating a full text and putting my expression into it, right? And I think one of the main reasons for that is because I didn't really read too much, right? When I was writing these stories, like I have stories from last year in like September, right? When I would go and I would write a couple sentences, but I look back at it now and I feel like it's so different than what I could write. And that jumps back to this story. Sorry if it's jumping all over the place, but that just jumps back to the story of last week, where it was around 1 a.m. And I was just like, why don't I try writing? So I picked up a notebook and I just started writing. And after the first sentence, I put down my pencil and I realized, it took a moment of reflection, because I was surprised at what I was able to produce. And this is not to say that my writing is amazing, right? But I was subjectively happy with what I had produced, right? I had a thought in my mind and I wanted to express it in a certain way, and I wanted it to convey a certain emotion. And I think I did that, right, with that first line. And I got really, really like excited and happy, and I was like, wow, like, and then I continued writing, and then I had a couple paragraphs done by the end of the night. And I went to sleep that night just having such a greater appreciation for literature and for these classic books that I'm reading, because I was writing, I'd say, like in a way where I'm not like mimicking how classic books are, but very motivated by classic books. And I think it showed me the amount of effort that goes into writing and what these authors really did with these texts, right? I think, after that night, it really showed me how writing is like a form of poetry, right? Even if you're reading a huge novel, right? When I was writing, I made sure that I felt like every single line in what I was writing had some sort of role to play in the entire reading experience, right? Whether that be setting up the environment, whether that be showing a certain nuance of a character, right? Everything had its role to play. And I think when we're reading, we often take that for granted. Because, for example, if you're reading through a book or a sentence, if you're reading through a sentence, you may not fully understand. I would often be like, I can skip this, I can come to it later. Or not even I can skip this, but I would be like, it'll be explained later, right? I wouldn't even mark it down or anything to come back to it later, because I would just be like, it'd be explained later. I'll find out in the next plot point, right? If it wasn't anything huge to the plot and it was just like a jumble of writing I didn't understand, I would just tell myself, is it really contributing to the plot? No. And then I'll move on, right? And after writing, you see that, everything I try to include in my text had its impact on the reading experience for me when I was rereading it and even writing it. I had a certain intent to portray with every single line. And, I was talking about this with my friend yesterday about how just like a book is not the same for multiple people, right? An author can write a book with a specific image in their mind of how the book looks and how a story is portrayed, right? If they're talking about, for example, a scenery, the author has a certain scenery in their mind, but you as a reader have a completely different scenery, and this isn't, this will never be exactly the same. No matter how many details you include, it'll never be exactly the same, because, all of our experiences lead us to come with our own kind of creations of an image and our own interpretations of a book. And I think that's why I love books. It really is a form of poetry, right? Because you gain so much more appreciation for it. And the first book I read after having this sort of night and realization was White Nights by Dostoevsky. And it was just, it's probably one of my favorite classics now. And I've read, I think, 4 so far. And I think it's just the writing and me taking the time to go through every word and search up every word I don't understand, or sit with the sentence for longer than a minute to think about it and to really understand how is this sentence contributing to the plot, right? And I think previously I wasn't doing that. I was reading a sentence, and if I didn't understand it, I would skip it and just hope that it was explained later. It was a really bad habit, because I wasn't taking the time to understand where the authors were coming from and to understand their intent. And I still don't think we can fully understand the author's intent and what was in their mind, because we'll never know what is in their mind or how they are portraying a certain story or how they want to portray a certain story. Obviously, they can put it in words, but the image in their mind will never be exactly the same, right? And if we don't take the time to at least try to comprehend what the author's intent was with the text, it feels like I was doing a disgrace to the author. So, and it feels like there's so much more within the text that we're missing out by not taking the time, right? And I think this goes into like something else I was thinking about. Sorry, this is a tangent, but I was thinking about, how I was always such a slow reader, right? I maybe read like a page every like 2 minutes. If I was trying to read fast, like a minute 45, a minute 30. I think it's pretty average, but for me, I felt like a slow reader because the people around me were able to read so fast. And I always thought this was a bad thing, right? And I think only until like last month, or even the night where I wrote, I started to realize that, I had this goal of reading 30 books per month, but reading a book is not the same as fully comprehending and understanding everything that the author has to give, right? I think now I would rather spend my time, reading, if it's only 10 books in a year, or if it's only, 15 books in a year, to fully comprehend or do my best at comprehending the entire text and treating the book as a form of poetry, especially if it's a classic book and a book that has lived to tell the tale, right? I think if you're reading a classic book and not, and if I'm not trying to do that, I'm just missing out on so much more than what the author kind of is trying to portray, right? I'm not fully grasping everything, right? That's why I think I need to reread The Picture of Dorian Gray, because I read that in like a week. And although it is a small text, I don't think, and I'm not saying if you're reading a book fast, that doesn't mean you're comprehending it. What I'm trying to say is that there's different approaches to reading, and you can read a book very fast and still comprehend it like amazing and really think about the book critically. But I think there's a difference between reading the book for the plot and then reading the book for the literature. And I think once I was able to separate the two and really understand how, the literature can really show you so much about the plot if you take the time to reflect on it, right? And I think this kind of leads to my main point of this video, of just, I would recommend everyone to start writing, or just to write down something, or just to express your emotion, right? Or use your human expression, right? All of us have these unique thoughts that are unique to us. No two people will have, yes, people have the same thoughts, but all of our experiences have led up to us in this current moment and to us perceiving things the way we perceive. And when we create things, you're able to see the expression of others and maybe value the expression of others much more, right? When you express yourselves, you see what goes into expression, and you can more value the expression of others, right? I think that's what that night kind of taught me. And it was a very kind of profound experience. And now I'm reading The Great Gatsby and The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm taking more time with these texts. You're giving your all to the text, right? You're really trying to understand what the authors are trying to say. And it's such a beautiful experience trying to understand where this author is coming from, because you're never going to know exactly what the author had in mind, right? Because you can't get a glimpse into their mind. They can try explaining it through words, but you're never going to see the image that's created in their mind, right? But we can do our best to try to comprehend that, right? And I think that's why I've began to grow a love for literature and for writing and for reading in this past week. And I just wanted to share that, because there might be other people who have that same experience, or there might be other people who might be in a reading slump, or maybe have lost their passion for reading. I advise you to maybe try writing something, even if it's just a paragraph. Try creative writing, try expressing yourself, try putting yourself into a paragraph. Try expressing yourself into a paragraph and leaving yourself in this paragraph, and being proud about something you create, right? Because it really shows you the value in things other people create. So I've yapped now for about almost 15 minutes. So I will conclude this video. I'll be posting some book reviews maybe throughout the week. This is just a channel for me to kind of rant like this, to talk about my experiences with books and my raw reviews about them. And if you have any thoughts, or if you guys have any similar experiences to what I was kind of talking about, I don't know if it came out in a way that's comprehensible. I don't know if I explained it correctly. As I mentioned, I most recently finished White Knight, so I will be posting a review about that. Just another yap session about my own thoughts of the book. If you guys plan to stick around, I'll see you guys in the next video. Otherwise, take care.